For me, justice should be restorative. But most of people's world justice systems are based on an old covenant mindset of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And they're retributive, not restorative. So I think God's kingdom is a restorative thing. So the foundation of God's throne being righteousness of justice, that isn't, oh, righteousness is the good part and justice is the bad part for punishment, because God doesn't have any punishment. So the justice is therefore a different concept than human justice. God's concept of justice is, I have reconciled the cosmos back to myself, therefore everything can be restored. That's justice. That's an outworking of the victory that Jesus won on the cross over all things. And he took back the keys of death and of Hades. And therefore now justice has a different concept. In the Old Testament, it was never God administrating that anyway. You know, it wasn't God saying, if something happens, you can take an eye. In fact, you must take an eye. It was like, you can only take an eye because I know what you like. So I'm going to limit what you can do because I know your sense of justice, whereas you're going to go and kill someone. So I'm saying you can't kill someone for this. So there's a limit, but we take it as that's the law. You must. So you must take an eye. And therefore our criminal justice system is pretty much based on retribution and punishment as a deterrent, rather than, well, okay, someone's done this. How can we help them not do it again? Now, I know that can be when they've done something really bad, but then if God has already forgiven them for doing something really bad, then it would be better if we chose a different way of trying to rehabilitate them. Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't, you should just ignore what people have done. And I'm not saying that there are some people that need to be carefully managed. And that might mean that they're restricted access to the general public because their mental health is such that they're a psychopath or whatever else. Obviously it's very complex, and there are a lot of people who operate out of a very broken, fragmented identity, and they're very dangerous people. Sociopaths, psychopaths, they're dangerous people, and therefore society should be protected from them. But rather than then seeing it as a punishment, we should then see how can we help them become healed, if it's possible. And I think anything's possible with God. So I think all things are possible and they can be restored. So I'm not advocating, just abandoning any form of sort of law, society based on some sort of law, but it's the punishment of the law when it's broken that's the issue. It's okay to say, well, stealing is not a good thing, therefore, don't steal. But what's the punishment for stealing? Well, in some instances, chop off your hand, which is pretty extreme punishment, obviously. In others, it will be, will you pay a fine or you go to jail or whatever, depending on the level of what they've stolen. But how do you turn someone who's a thief into someone who isn't a thief? Well, help restore their identity so they don't see themselves as a criminal anymore. That will begin to bring change. Now, I know that sounds very idealistic, but then the kingdom of God is idealistic. It's based on a heaven where there is no sickness, sin, there is no any of that stuff. So, heaven's way of dealing with things, Jesus said, forgive your enemies and bless them. So whatever we do should be based on the basis of forgiveness and therefore restoration through a process, rather than, I'm not saying you let people off scot-free and they just do whatever and they can carry on doing whatever, because there's a sense where they need to take responsibility and there are consequences for actually breaking a law, if it's the law of the land. But the consequences need to be, therefore, justice is restorational justice, not punitive or retributive. And I think ultimately that will work because it's God's way. But of course, people don't believe that it's God's way. People believe that God punishes people. Therefore, they see that that's the way God does it. So we do it that way, and of course, if you take it from the Old Testament view of how God does things, of course, that's how you're going to see it, So definitely government using authority to deal with opposition, needs to be done with the right heart and the right motive in the same way that God does it. And God doesn't do it out of bitterness or resentment or any negative emotion. He's only going to function out of love because that's who he is. But of course, love speaks the truth, and love doesn't just say, oh, that's okay then, you know, because love wants the best for someone, and someone being a thief is not the best for them or anybody else. So God, of course, God would want everyone to be restored to the image that he created them in, which is a restoration process. And we're all broken. We just express our brokenness and fragmentation in a different way. We may not go out and steal or kill or do those sorts of things, but we may have other issues in our lives that are equally destructive to us, that he will obviously want to restore and heal and make sure we're not broken and fragmented or living in lost identity, you know, which is a much less than kind of life. If everyone valued themselves the way God valued them, and therefore valued everyone else in the same way and treated everybody the way God treats them, the world would be a completely different place. But if we go on treating people the way God doesn't treat them, then it's not going to do an awful lot to change things, because it just repeats the cycle.